to the ninth episode of the 523 podcast. I am Devan Corbello, owner of Corbello's Menswear, and I am joined by Matt Young. Hello, Matt.
Hey, happy to be with you today.
Thank you for coming on. Matt is the Director of Cultural Affairs for the City of Lake Charles, and a very good friend of mine, and just an all-around good guy. And I just love having him on. I'm really glad he finally came on.
Absolutely, I'm glad to be with you.
Yeah, and Andrea is not here today, so it's just the guys. We're going to have a little guy chat, I guess, if you will.
Good deal.
So, Matt, tell us just a real quick overview of what you do, for your job.
Sure. Director of Cultural Affairs seems so heavy,
Right.
cumbersome. It's I actually have a really fun job. I love it a lot. I oversee the arts and history exhibits that come to the city of Lake Charles at a couple of different facilities. We plan all of the city's events, and of course, I report directly to the mayor. But my job is essentially putting together the fun stuff that people love in Lake Charles.
Right.
And so it's inspiring to go to work every day. It's fun work. My husband and I went to Europe recently, and we were coming back, and I was actually starting to miss my job,
Right.
which sounds ridiculous. I don't know too many people who go on vacation and they want to come back. But
Right. Well, you see all those, like, the museums and everything that's over there, and I'm sure you're like,
Inspired.
Just really inspired, yeah.
I want to bring some of that to Lake Charles for sure.
Yeah, I've always loved museums, and I've talked about this before, but for my birthdays growing up, like, my mom would take me either to, like, Houston or New Orleans, and would go to, like, the museum and the zoo. Like, as a very nerdy kid growing up, and I never just wanted to, like, do laser tag or one of those, like, normal kids things.
No.
I always loved going to see the dinosaurs, and, of course, that's where the logo comes in. And
Yeah.
I love history, and everywhere we'd go, we'd always, like, try to go to a museum, like, in a new city or a new town. And so it's really great that we have that here in Lake Charles for people.
For sure. What was really eye-opening to me we went to two cities there, Paris and London, and the two couldn't be more different. So
Right.
in London, you wanted to see all the churches and museums, and the churches there were a paid admission to, like, get in and check out, like, the cathedral area and stuff like that. All the museums were free admission in London. In Paris, it was exactly the opposite. You had to
Really?
pay to get into the museums, but free to get into Notre Dame when you went to see that church.
That's odd.
Just so much history on display. And so for folks who don't know, in Lake Charles, we've got a free public art museum located downtown, Historic City Hall Arts and Cultural Center. That's one of our buildings, and one of the most memorable exhibits that's ever been there is Titanic. People love like going back to that one.
Yeah.
We're trying to bring in a more diverse lineup, and so we've got a sports Hall of Fame one that's coming up.
Really?
Yeah,
That's so cool.
Got a World War II museum. The exhibit that's coming out of the World War II museum is going to be this fall. And then one that I'm really excited about is a sculpture exhibit that's opening in May, and it's from the LSU Museum of Art. It's like 10-foot tall welded sculptures that represent the history of jazz.
Really?
And so there's like a piano formation, there's a guy playing a saxophone, and what's totally exciting about it is the night of the opening reception, we're going to have a couple of jazz bands in there playing, so you'll be surrounded by jazz music, looking at jazz sculptures.
That's awesome. And when is that opening? You said
It
May?
opens May 10th,
Okay.
And it'll be up on exhibit for the next 9 weeks.
That's so cool.
We try to keep things fresh, and most of our exhibits stay up from between 8 and 12 weeks, so you can come back every 2 or 3 months and always see something new.
For sure. And I've gone a lot recently since you've
Thanks.
gone. Yeah. And then I've gone before too, and I do remember whenever I was a kid going for the Titanic Museum, because I loved the Titanic, and that was really neat. But going to see, we just had the Art of Animation, which was really neat.
Yeah. Looney Tunes and
Right,
Pink Panther, who doesn't love that?
It was really cool to see the process that those artists took to make that. And I've always loved, like, films and movies and animation, and always just the intricate work behind those scenes that they draw, and, like, you just have to do it over and over again. It's really neat. And then I love history, and I love, like, local history. So y'all do have, or you may have already gotten rid of it, but it's a lot of the history of Lake Charles, especially with the fire in 1910 or 11. Is it
Yeah,
11?
Great Fire of 1910, and we've got one permanent exhibit on the second floor
Okay,
that
that's
kind
what it
of highlights that history. In fact, the fire of 1910 burned down like 9 city blocks in Lake Charles. 300 people were all of a sudden without homes. It burned down the cathedral, the courthouse, and so imagine a city in such disarray that you don't even know where to go for your public hearing or
Right.
where to get your water turned on because all of those basic government buildings were burned. But we do have the history of that there. One that we hosted recent, so I want to make the museum something that everybody's interested in and everybody loves, and we're trying to get beyond just the art and involve people in some classes, some leisure learning, some gallery talks that kind of engage the mind. And so we had a Japanese ceramics class there recently, and to kind of add value with other programming, we also did like a Japanese feng shui class.
Yeah,
We had
I
a
went to that
Japanese
one. That was
ikebana
really
class.
cool.
You and Emily were awesome. When y'all walked in, I was like, "Yep, my friends.
Yeah,
There they are."
it was packed out. Like, and you're like scrambling to get more chairs,
Sure.
and it was really neat to see everyone. It was a Saturday morning, and like, you
Yeah.
know, we were excited. It was like learn some feng shui, and is more about the history of feng shui, which is really neat because I had no idea. Just you hear it in like movies and things like that, but it's really like, oh, let's just move the couch around. But it was so much more than that, and that was really neat to see. So I'm really glad you're implementing a lot of those programs. Just
Sure.
and you're surrounded by all these beautiful art pieces too while you're in this class. And it was the Japanese exhibit at the time where these artists would take inspiration from nature and like make it into pottery and sculptures, and that was really neat.
Yeah. I think it always makes it more interesting when you can see their thought process or inspiration for
For
it.
sure.
What our other building is something very much in line with what you do. We've got an incubator of sorts at Central School, Arts and Humanities Center located on Kirby Street, and organizations like the Lake Charles Symphony, the Arts and Humanities Council, which you're on the board of, Lake Charles Community Band, the Children's Theater Company, other itinerant theater company. A lot of them occupy space there, and our goal in that building is allowing individual artists or groups that really want to get a start to get ahead to occupy space there. So if they want to start an arts business, they can come in there just like they do at the Seed Center, get affordable rent. I think it's something like 50 cents a square foot, and that includes all of your utilities,
That's
Wi-Fi.
awesome.
But it allows entrepreneurs and business-minded people to kind of really get their foot in the door and establish a start.
That's awesome. I didn't realize it was more of an incubator. I mean, I guess I did. I just didn't realize.
Yeah.
I don't know. But that's really neat because I did see other new artists in there. They would have studios. I guess I just didn't realize it was an
So
incubator.
it's like the
that's neat.
third floor. There's a guitar
Right.
instructor. There's a vocal lessons guy. Several photographers. Kind of just getting their start. And what I love seeing about that is really what we should all aspire for is this synergy in the building where
Right.
organizations are working together. There's artists that are creating backdrops for theater groups and really like taking advantage of those other businesses' services.
Right.
There's writer groups that are working with artists to illustrate their books, and so my hope is that you can walk in there and find whatever person to help you with whatever project you're working on and really build some synergy in that way.
Right, and I'm jealous, and I think you're lucky. You get to work in these really neat buildings with Historic City Hall and the Central School. They're all landmarks in Lake Charles, and they're all very beautiful, and they did a really good job of restoring them and just kind of keeping up with them. And so I love buildings. Like, I love architecture. I love the different the themes behind the different eras in architecture, and so I've always been jealous of you just because those are really neat places to work, and there's so much history behind each and every building. Because I know I go to Central School at least once a month for our board meetings, and in the front they have like the boys' side and the girls' side for the entrances, and I've always been curious as to why, I don't know, just why they have like the two different genders on there, and so I love seeing those historic buildings, I guess.
So as it was explained to me, Annette Ballard, local school board member, her father was a principal at Central School, and she attended school there. She did tell me one funny story one time about she actually slid down the banister that goes from the second floor to the first, and her father came around the corner at the same time and saw her, and he had to make an example out of his daughter, wasn't supposed to do that.
Right.
So he brought her into the principal's office and turned the intercom on for everyone to hear, and he spanked her, and everybody in the school heard her crying. Isn't that awful?
Totally
Totally off topic, but when you talk about
that's great.
That's that's the cool thing about working in a historic building is all of the events and things that have occurred in those same exact rooms before. You know, like
Yes.
my office is an old judge's office, and I wonder around like how many cases were pondered and how many decisions were made, and you know, the action written based on that. The building was built in 1911, so what first mayor of Lake Charles, or at least in 1911, made serious decisions
Right.
that affect what the city looks like now, and in those same exact rooms. You know?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not gonna lie, I've always wanted to slide down those banisters to be honest. So good for her. But for sure, and one of my favorite cities is DC, and just the history behind that, and walking in those rooms, and so just I'm sure feeling that every day with you, and the bell tower. I know you took us up that one time for Wayne's birthday, and which was really a beautiful view. And then, you know, y'all got married there too, which is really neat.
We
that
did. It's cool that I get to work in a building
right.
with so many connections.
Yeah,
To a personal life.
for sure.
Well, one of my mentors is Randy Roach, and I think that he's got the biggest heart, you know, for humanity in general. And one of the things that he told me one time was, and I will always carry it with me, you know, for folks like he and I, we can save up and we can go on a vacation. You know, it might take a year or 2 years to save, but eventually we can get there and put a little money aside each month. He said a lot of people live month to month on a paycheck, and they'll never have the opportunity to go on a, you know, nice vacation like that. So what we do in Lake Charles for quality of life is for those people whose nicest day is going to be spent in a Lake Charles park, or their best memory as a kid is going to be spent at this free public art museum.
Yeah.
And so you do it for them, you know, for those people who really aren't able to experience life outside of Lake Charles.
Gosh, I miss him. He, my earliest memory of Mayor Roach, he was, I was in daycare, and we walked over to the library downtown. I was at First Methodist, and he was dressed up in like this polar bear like slippers and like polar bear hands, and he was like reading some book about polar bears, obviously. And it was just, ever since then, like I've seen him, you know, of course, multiple times since then, but my earliest memory of him, and he's been our longest serving mayor, and just the mayor for most of people my age, that they've only known him. So it was really, he's always been a good guy, and I do miss seeing him around more, you know, like we did whenever he was mayor. But
for sure, I'm glad to see he's staying plugged in. I think he's teaching a couple of adjunct law classes at McNeese.
That's awesome.
And Nick is doing a fantastic job.
Yes.
He's making great strides and leaps for Lake Charles, and I think that he's going to accomplish very much in his first term. If there's not some major visual differences like in the next 2.5 years, then I'm going to be completely wrong. But he's doing a lot to move the city forward.
For sure, and it's really exciting time in Lake Charles, and I've said it before, but just with all the growth and all the new things coming into the area, and then with the new mayor and a new vision.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, you know, what do you have? Do you have a vision for Lake Charles as far as like arts and culture goes, and like what do you envision for that for the next few years?
Sure. So right now, I would venture to say that maybe only 15% of the people who live in Lake Charles are aware of, you know, Historic City Hall and the fact that it's this public art museum. First of all, I want 95% of the people who live here to know and to really use that building and take it as their own, and give us recommendations on what traveling exhibitions that they want to see, because we can access some really cool stuff from the Smithsonian, you know, if we just know what people want to come and see. And then secondly, that's really developing like the museum and the exhibits, but I want us to have more events year round, and I want us to plan them in spaces that maybe aren't as utilized as they could be. So for starters, I want Live at the Lakefront and Downtown at Sundown to each add 2 weeks onto their events so that they roll right into each other. So you have 5 weeks of Live at the Lakefront, 6 weeks of Downtown at Sundown, and they're connected. And you just get that crowd to move right across the street to the new venue.
Well, wait till after I'm done.
Wait till you're like, 3 is enough.
Right.
That's a lot of work.
It is, and they do a great job.
Y'all do a great job. But I want to plan events in spaces that we don't utilized as much. We're really trying to capitalize on some progress in the Nellie Letcher Cultural District, which is inclusive of Enterprise Boulevard, just to the north of I-10.
Beautiful part of town.
Like oak trees, that and at one point in Lake Charles history, that place was bustling. There was dance halls and music venues all along there, and I really want to reactivate that space. And you can do that by planning events that bring people into an area, and really get them familiar with the area, but do away with maybe some connotations that they've had in their own mind, like that's a dangerous part of town, or we don't go over there. So you plan an event and get people comfortable and dancing on the streets in that place, and then they're more likely to go back next Friday and purchase something from a grocery store or a record store there.
But you kind of put that in motion this past year with the historic Living History Cemetery Tour, which I think John O'Donnell and I talked about that on a few podcasts ago. But it's a really great tour, and you had the cemetery I was in, I think, just right outside of that district at Goss Cemetery, and then we had, was it Orange Grove?
Right.
Kind of all like right there. Unless I could be totally, my like visual of like the map is maybe off, but like it was really neat to bring that part of Lake Charles into these really neat events that we're hosting, and people are there and they're having a fun time on a Friday night.
So much history in Lake Charles to look at, and when you start looking at it from that eyeglass, from that perspective, then you really don't worry as much about what part of town you're in.
Right.
Whether or not the assumption that it's not a safe part of town or a crime-driven part of town is accurate or not, our mind just kind of puts it into this bubble where we don't go there.
Right.
And so what was very cool about that event is they got people moving in different parts of town that they're not used to going. We've talked multiple times about building a bike trail that connects Riverside Park with Preon Lake Park, and so it's a beautiful park in North Lake Charles and a beautiful park in South Lake Charles, and you can get folks to go back and forth, and it's a 13.1 mile trek from both parks, so exactly half marathon distance. Right. So if you can run that distance or bike that distance move yourself into an area that you're not as familiar with, it kind of gets us all talking and helps us embrace every part of our community, not just those that we're comfortable with.
Yeah, and speaking of like different partnerships and thing, I was talking to our friend Charlotte the other day, and she was just, of course, bragging on you, and we were talking about the kind of the boom and arts and culture in the area with Jody at Banners and Ashley at the Arts Council, and then you at Historic City Hall. She called it a trifecta, and it was a really great quote that I just was like, I wrote it down. I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to mention it in the podcast this week. But I really think that all three of y'all are doing a great job with bringing all these different cultural events and cultural things here in town for people that may have never seen that before, may have not had access before. And so just one, thank you. And then two, it's a really exciting time to see that. I mean, we had the Red Hot Chili Peppers here the other day, and was it at McNeese?
Yeah.
With Banners, and then we had Downtown at Sundown with Wayne Toops this past weekend, and Mickey Smith, and then the Flamethrowers and Lovers the other 2 weeks before.
It was a really great band.
It was
incredible.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of their work, the Lovers, like to start with, and so the fact that Lake Charles brought them and put them on a stage here, I was excited about that.
Yeah.
Charlotte is great with words. I'm not sure that I would describe us as a trifecta, but she's really, really beautiful to say.
She's very talented, yeah.
And I'm honored to even be on the same level as Ashley Waldrop and Jody Taylor, but I will say that there's a lot of opportunity and momentum right now, and I feel like those two are really taking advantage of that and helping capitalize on it. Ashley and I were talking last week, and Central School Auditorium is one that's largely underutilized. And what's great in Lake Charles is that you have these different size venues. Like Golden Nugget, LaBerge, they're catering to large-scale concerts in their ballrooms, and they're meeting that need. Rosa Hart Theater, it's 2,000 seats, and so it's a little harder to fill 2,000 seats. And if you plan a concert and 800 people come in a 2,000 person auditorium, it looks a little empty. But it's perfect for Central School, which has up to 500 seats. And so
they have everything that you need there. They have a stage, they have a backstage, they have
lights,
the resources,
all of that already in place. And so if you can get some artists that want kind of a more intimate connected environment where they're not, 400 feet from the person who's sitting in the back row, but they're kind of just all in one little room.
Right.
They're able to tell that story of their life and really connect with the audience. Central School's auditorium is great for that. And
yes, for sure.
I want to see some smaller scale concerts in that. It's like what Ashley Gott is doing with the Listening Room.
Yes, which is a fantastic concert series that she has started.
Yeah. I mean, you leave those concerts and you feel connected with the artist. You feel like they were able to tell you a little bit about their life story and learn from them. It's really a genius concept, and they're doing that in cash and carry again, getting people into a part of town where they probably wouldn't go if they were just going back and forth between work and the grocery store. Right,
exactly, and we have such a big talent here in Lake Charles, and we've always had that with Nellie Lutcher and Juan Pla, which is my character in the living history.
You rocked that, by the way, man. You no.
Thank you.
let me interject. We were at Orange Grove, and so you were set up at Goss Cemetery as Juan Pla, and all night long, I think people went to Orange Grove last because maybe they wanted to. It was spooky, and they wanted to see Tony Joe Henry's ghost whenever it was after dark.
Right.
But all night long, people were telling us how great of a job you did as Juan Pla, and that
sweet.
you were like that you knew his life so well that you were like memorized the script and did that. But when they were asking you questions following that, you just kind of made something up that went along with it, and it was even more entertaining that way.
You just kind of have to BS it sometimes. But it was a really interesting character, and he was from Spain and traveled over to California to act in Spanish movies. Met a girl that's from Lake Charles and moved here and settled down here after. And so you had to do this research, and there was a script, and I'm of kind of Spanish descent, like way a long time ago. Corbello is Spanish in origin, but I don't look Spanish. I'm really white and just not dark complected in the script. I'm not sure who wrote it. Maybe Amy Herbert, but they said that his dark good looks and Spanish accent, and I tried so hard to have a Spanish accent, and I could not. And poor thing, Andrea, she tried with me because she's half Cuban, and so she's like, Devan, it's just not coming out. So I had to ad-lib this line. I was like, okay, I lost my complexion and my accent after death, but here I am. And everyone loved that little line, which made me feel good. And we had a lot of talent, and you and Erica and Trent Grimion, y'all really brought all this talent in from the volunteers for parking and acting and script writing, and it was a really neat event. And so it was really fun to do, and I'm really glad to be a part of the first one.
Yeah, so. That's what made the tour, the group of volunteers that really got together and took ownership in cleaning up the cemeteries, first of all. And they might have been neglected. They really cleaned up the spaces. But they owned those characters, and people really believed it. So you got to visit with Jacob Bryan at his burial site. And before, maybe nobody had gone to that cemetery before and seen this beautiful statue of Jesus that stands, just off of the interstate. Yeah.
Well, and I think whenever we went to clean it up one time, in one of the cemeteries, they said it was like the slave quarters at one point, and then so we looked in, and not the slave quarters, but that's where the slaves were buried back in the early days.
The slaves and indentured servants.
And we saw this one little baby grave, unfortunately, with the last name Corbello, and that died in like 1953, and that was a really neat thing to see, one, because a lot of the Corbellos are in the blue, so their grave sites are in like the little blue cemetery, and so to see one in Lake Charles, it was just really neat to see. And so it was eye-opening in so many aspects that I'm just so glad I was a part of it.
Yeah, but it really was.
But going back to speaking of talent, I think that we're utilizing a lot of that talent for Lake Charles with the artist and with the Arts Council and Ashley Gott with the Listening Room, just with musicians and artists and people, actors and writers. And I think it's a really great time, and it could be like an artist boom here, and I think it could go further out into where we're impacting more arts and culture and around the United States and around the world. So I'm really excited that we're doing all this and you're doing this and helping with that.
Yeah, it's a trickle effect,
Mm-hmm.
much like fashion, I guess. Like,
Yeah.
and I, you want it, you want that momentum with the arts to
Mm-hmm.
kind of expand into some of the rural areas surrounding us, and maybe pick up into another urban area.
For sure.
But I've always been intrigued by those trends. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
how does that start, and where does it end and begin in Europe?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I skinny jeans all over, like
Mm-hmm.
pencil tapered. Like I'm not sure how some of those guys actually put those jeans on
No.
in the morning, and I feel like in Lake Charles we're seeing like a more tapered jean,
Mm-hmm.
but like the full time skinny jeans are not here. In
Yeah.
fact, I felt really out of place there. I was like, these are so baggy, and they were kind of probably the more like fitted jeans that I
Right.
had. But I've always wondered, where does fashion start? Where do these trends like begin,
Mm-hmm.
and where does it move?
It's really odd. Like you have to kind of follow it very closely. And this is going to be the second podcast that I quote "The Devil Wears Prada" in it. But there's that scene,
Easily quotable, please.
right? And there's that scene where Anne Hathaway's character is like in this like frumpy sweater, and she's like, "Oh, I don't care about fashion." And then Meryl Streep is like, "Well, it started whenever Calvin Klein or somebody at a runaway show a couple years ago, and then it just kind of spread out to the department stores and to the fast fashion industry, and that's basically how it happens, at least from what I've seen. Mm-hmm. So those big name brands like Gucci and Versace, and just those big fashion houses that go on the runway, and it looks crazy at that point, and then it gets picked up the next season, and it gets picked up, and it's just it evolves into something that we wear now. So it's really neat to see how fashion starts out as an artistic concept, and then it goes into the everyday wear a couple years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's looking at it from the strictly like sales perspective. Like it starts on the runway, and then it goes into department stores,
Right.
and then it might make it to Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Right.
Who knows?
Like 5 years later.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
But like also the people wearing it. I mean, like where do you get the most people to adopt a mindset and that's what looks good, and so I'm going to start wearing that, and then all of a sudden people who would have never dreamed of wearing skinny pants are like, maybe I should do that because everybody else is.
And I've always said you never say no in fashion, because I used to say, oh, I'll never wear that, and then I'm like 2 months, 3 months later, I'm like, oh, well, that kind of looks good. And so I'm like, putting my foot in my mouth. But it's, you just have to get the right people. And, like Kate Middleton, they have like the Kate Middleton effect, where she wears something and it sells out within like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And just these different people that are influential, obviously. But
sure.
Always fine. And it's really neat to see. I watched this documentary on Alexander McQueen, which he created, the McQueen Fashion House, which is a very artistic fashion house. If you see a lot of like what Lady Gaga and like Nicki Minaj, like they wear a lot of his stuff, and it's very eccentric and very just out there. But the influences that he saw and picked up on just like maybe from walking down the street, and you see just kind of the architecture from he lived in London, so from the 16th century, and like just different things in nature with the way a tree is shaped, and then you kind of turn that into a dress or to a suit. It's really neat to see that, and I really have always admired the artistic side of fashion and the influence behind that.
Yeah.
So it's a little connected, and I feel hopefully now we'll move into those people that may come out of Lake Charles as fashion designers, as people that are influencing that industry, versus, because I think in Louisiana we have a lot of rich history with all the mix that we have, the gumbo, if you will, with the Acadians and the French, and then the Creole and from the Caribbean, which eventually they came from Africa. So it's a lot of that mix, and then the Spanish eventually, and then the English and Irish and German, and it's a big mix, and I feel like we have all that influence here, and it's a great way to spread it out, because I think Louisiana is very unique. I've traveled a lot, and there's no place like Louisiana.
Absolutely.
We just have a lot of rich history that I don't think people really realize,
And just a product of so many different influences.
Right.
It's funny that you talk about fashion like as a reflection of architecture and art and things like that, because I don't think that for the most part people look at fashion as an art form, but it very much is. Like it's like a, if you the artist are expressing yourself in your clothes, then that's like the voice that comes out in you.
Right.
Ken Baskin is a ceramics professor at McNeese, and right now his students have like an exhibit on the first floor. And one thing that he told me was, I've never want to be a professor that is teaching an exact skill to where my students just become little mini replicas of me. Like they're all creating the exact same thing.
And didn't his students, they had that exhibit on the first floor, right?
Yeah.
At 1910?
Yeah, they did. And what he said was like, as a teacher, I want to encourage them to find their own voice, like to use their own genuine, authentic voice that they are as an artist, and not just create these little mini replicas of me. And so I think that's what's so cool about what you're doing in Lake Charles, and there are a few others that are really encouraging people to think about fashion not just as a means to an end. Like you're not just covering your body so people don't see your naked parts, but like you're expressing yourself. You know, what you pick up and put on in the morning is an expression of like how you feel, or what you want people to think about you, or obviously dress for success, and you're putting your best foot forward.
Right, for sure. And just fun fact about that ceramics class, which was really neat, and I could see from what you could have, Ken Baskin's, is it? It's and you go and you see that exhibit, and it's all these different pieces that really have no connection to each other. And then the girl who designed my logo, Eve Krusterner, she was in that class, and she has an art piece there, or I don't know if it's still there, but it's a really neat ceramic vase maybe. But then like right across from that, it's like this really scary looking head, and I'm just like, what is that? And it kind of freaked me out for a second, but it was really neat to see the different things, because I think this one girl made a shoe out of, what was it?
Like screws and bolts.
Right.
She also did it like out of something as opposite of screws and bolts, like flower petals. So she was
it's really neat to see
both
that.
ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. So, but I appreciate the compliment, and I think fashion is important. I've said this before, and just it's a big influence on everyone's life, whether they know it or not. You may show up in a camo jacket to school because you think, oh, like I just like camo. Oh, that's like you expressing yourself. Okay, you're a hunter, or you like, which is really a simple analogy, I guess. But or you're gonna show up in a nice like name brand like Chanel purse, or kind of like Adidas like jacket or something. You want to look sporty, or you want to look trendy, and so it's thinking of like from like a high schooler's perspective, and then eventually to an adult, fashion is more influential than you think.
Yeah, it's totally an extension of your own brand. Like you're letting people see parts about you that you want them to know.
Yeah, for sure.
And you don't realize, I guess, the student, and shortly after, like working young professional, you don't realize like how big of a role it plays in what you're perceived, and even how you feel about yourself, moving throughout the day. It's like as important as breakfast, I guess, like, because
for sure.
You might experience a slump at 10:30 and you're like, oh, this sucks. And but I'm wearing something slouchy and wrinkled and I just want to go home. But then like at 10:30 you experience a slump and you're wearing something that like you pressed that morning and you felt good about. You put these couple of things together and you're like, just a little bump of energy, man. I'm feeling
for
good
sure.
about it.
And you kind of,
look good.
Yeah, you feel confident, and then so. But shifting gears a little bit, it's summertime. If it doesn't feel like it right now, I think it's like 50 degrees outside, and it's spring and summer is coming up. And then on Friday night we were out at Live at the Lakefront, and I feel like I did get a little bit of sun on my face, and I felt it the next morning, and I was like, man, like I forgot to put sunscreen on. And sunscreen is very important. I'm sure you know this. It's people don't realize that you just, and for guys, like to make sure that your face especially.
Sure.
They say that's like one of the biggest like skincare things you can do for your body. If you don't do anything else, make sure you put sunscreen on your face to protect from the UV rays. Just every day, like that's part of your morning routine. Like just put like SPF 30 or 20 and you're good to go. And so to make sure that you don't have a lot of sun damage on your face. So what else do you do? And you're bald, which is great. You rock it. And so for my bald listeners, if any of you are out there, what do you do like to protect your head
Yeah.
during the summertime?
It's a good question.
Anytime?
You really don't think about the damage that sun causes until you hit like 30, and then you start seeing the effects of it, and you're like, oh man, I got to be very proactive about this.
Right.
And I've seen some images before, like on the internet, of truck drivers, particularly like men in their 50s, 60s, where one side of their face may have always been like exposed to the sun by the
Right.
window, and one side not so much. And there's a stark difference
Oh,
between
wow.
like the side that's by the window that has all the wrinkles and the other side of their face that was more shielded that is not. And so if you're not a believer, look at those pictures of truck drivers that
Yes.
did not use sunscreen.
Yes.
And you will be a believer. Shout out to our truck drivers. Do you have
Yes.
a lot of truck driver listeners?
No, I don't know.
Maybe.
My cousin is a truck driver,
All right.
so I don't think he listens though.
You'll find out.
Yeah,
but,
right.
But so particularly for bald guys, you do have to be a lot more proactive about it. I heard this from an esthetician one time. She was like, what's nice about guys without beards is that you're shaving often, and so that exfoliation is like a natural good part of like the skincare process. And for guys who are bald and are shaving their head every other day or so, like it's exfoliating your skin, but you have to be very cognizant about re-moisturizing, putting some SPF on.
For sure.
That's going to shield you from the sun. And a couple of the tricks that I've learned along the way, obviously the hard way, because razor burns sometimes happen, and I have learned if you shave the night before, then a lot of times, like while you're sleeping, that goes away, and you get to wake up in the morning. You got a fresh, clean shave, but still no razor burns.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
that's one good tip. But just moisturizing and using something with an SPF in it that will protect your head, because there's nothing worse than like a sun-scorched
Yeah.
prune of a bald head. It's like it looks bad,
And it feels worse.
It feels worse.
Yeah.
Oh, try to shave it the next time and like going across that like sun burnt head. But people are sympathetic to bald guys too. Like I can't tell you the number of baseball caps that I have received as a gift because I'm like, people are just worried about my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
It takes a little extra care.
Yes, for sure. And I think like Neutrogena has this lotion and sun SPF in it, and so it's a really great, kill two birds with one stone, moisturizer and sunscreen. So it's really an what's it called, underrated part of your routine that you should definitely do if you don't do anything else.
I have used that exact Neutrogena product before.
It's good.
And what's nice about it too is it's not oily.
Right.
So your face doesn't look like you just put lotion on and it's like glowing by noon.
For sure. Now, so you shave every other day. You said it's what do you use any particular razor, or like what do you like, what's the best form of razor that you've experienced?
I love that you mentioned Neutrogena because my shaving cream is a Neutrogena base.
Really?
Yeah,
That's awesome.
And it lasts a long time. It's a little bit more expensive, but it certainly like matters for sure. And then just a Mach 3 Gillette razor is what I use. It's something that takes a little getting used to because you're not familiar with the back of your head the first time you shave.
Yeah.
You need to look in the mirror and check, make sure you don't have any spots. But it's now a decision that I'm glad to have. It's really maintenance free. My hair is not blowing in the wind.
Yeah.
I was starting to like have a little receding hairline, and so I was trying to like use mousse to make my hair go all different directions and cover the spots. I don't worry about that anymore.
Yeah.
And I think socially it's like a lot more acceptable too. You see lots of guys shaving their heads now.
And I think if you have thinning hair, like shave it. Don't be afraid. Like, and
Embrace the bald.
Right, for sure. I always love whenever my hair's short because it's very low maintenance. It's very just kind of wake up, get it wet, and like you're good. So I may go bald one day just to do it. I'm actually speaking of my cousin who's a truck driver, he asked me to like kind of buzz his hair one time, and I nicked his hair, so he had to like go bald for a couple weeks, and I felt really bad about that. He was like, "Devin, let me give you a haircut now." I'm like,
no, not so
good.
much. Keep the clippers away.
But I forgot to mention this before we started, but I usually ask my guests this. Is there a book right now, or maybe a book that you've had an influence over your life that have changed your life that you want to share with our listeners?
Mm. Wow, that's a good one.
I know. I'm sorry. I forgot
Several.
to.
My utmost for his highest, kind of a daily devotional is one that I carry with me,
Mhm.
and it's uh, such a breath of fresh air in the morning
Mhm.
for me, anyways, and kind of gets me off on a good start. Um,
And what's it called?
my utmost for his highest,
Okay.
and then an, not really life changing, but I'm just a nerd and I love John Grisham books. You know, I feel like there's always like this problem that's easily solved and it brings me through the plot. It doesn't take too much stress to like read that book. So
Right.
I'm
It's
a big
just
Grisham fan. But
yeah.
I can't say that I'm life changing or like getting anything out of it. But
Well, hey, it's good. Sometimes you just need like one of those. It's kind of like you're watching like your favorite show on Netflix. If you know what happens, there's no stress, and like just turn it on or you read it, and then just gets you through that next step to actually figure out a problem that you have in your own life.
Wait, you just reminded me of something. What is the book? They made a movie out of it recently. The guy that lost his daughter and he went to the shack.
Oh,
That was a life-changing book.
Really?
For me. Yeah,
I heard it was a good book and a movie. I didn't get to see it, unfortunately, but
it brings you to the like depths of this man's like grieving soul and really explores that. And then, you know, all throughout the book, the shack is this possibly symbolic but possibly realistic place where he visits, and that's where he like interacts with God personally and meets him as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit as different people. But it was just such a book of renewal for me, and seeing faith a little bit differently.
For sure. I'll have to check it out.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So real quick before we end, I didn't write down any questions. So that was something new we tried, and but I do have a question. What is maybe one, if you could live besides like, you know, now, if you could live in any era in history, you know, from like the dawn of time to now, like what would it be? Just I know that's an odd question, just a personality question maybe.
Oh my gosh, I feel like since coming back from Europe, this might change my answer a little bit, because prior to that, I would have said like the Roaring Twenties. I just want to
like the Great Gatsby.
Yeah, man, the era of indulgence, and people just like really lived, and they weren't so tied down by like work and stuff. It was ahead of the Great Depression, so there wasn't this insurmountable pressure weighing down on them. But
for sure.
Since going over there, it makes you realize how really like young we are as a nation, and the 250 years that we look at as existence. There's a lot more to it than that. So I don't know, maybe the 1100s would have been cool to live in.
I've always loved that part of history, like antiquity, with like the ancient Greeks and the Romans, and you know, with all like the mythology and like just that era. Like there's so much culture again going back to that, because I think I love that one, and it's just there's so much history there, and you get to be with all these people like, you know, Socrates and Aristotle, and they're all like making these really influential decisions, and
totally.
I mean, of course, that the Greeks and Romans, they've influenced a lot of our government, so we have a lot of that, and our architecture in you know, DC with the columns, and I've always loved, and I want to go and visit you know, Rome and Italy and Greece to see that ancient history and architecture.
Absolutely. Those characters in that time period were so unapologetically themselves. You know, they like were extreme versions of themselves. And I feel like today anyway, it becomes very easy for you to like get worried about what people perceive of you, and you're trying to walk this balance of like being yourself but also being somebody that's approved of by others. And in that Greek time, it seems like people were just so unapologetically genuine.
For sure. And
I get that fascination too.
Yeah, and that's always, I don't know, I've loved just that whole time period, and like with Egypt and Greece, and just like where the great empires, you know, were. And then, you know, you kind of look at history, and then like that was happening in China too, and it was just really a fun time in history, I think. So I mean, not that if I were living in it, I couldn't see all that, but I always go back to that.
Oh, dude, I think you would own that era for sure.
For sure. I feel It's kind of crazy.
It's confident.
But like I feel like Alexander the Great, and I feel like I was him in a past life.
Absolutely.
I'm just like hoping.
You guys both have great hair.
Right?
Yeah,
And
for sure.
I mean, I've never been able to ride a horse really well, so I don't know if that. But he did have war elephants, and I've always loved elephants. So that's that.
Big time.
Anyway, again, Matt, thank you so much. And real quick, can you tell us how they can keep up with everything that's happening with you and at Historic City Hall?
Yeah, we want people to know about the events and the exhibits that are coming up. Easiest way to do that is on Facebook. We are Historic City Hall Arts and Cultural Center. We also have a website, cityoflakecharles.com/arts and culture. But you can connect with us online or in person. Come by. We're open 6 days a week. Historic City Hall is, and we're open 10 to 5. We're getting ready to expand our hours to 10 to 6 so that folks can come in after work, make it a little bit more accessible. And then also on Saturdays, we've got the farmers market happening every Saturday morning from 8 to 12.
Yep.
And the museum open until 2.
It's a nice date night or date, like lunch date idea too on Saturdays, or for
sure.
like the gallery opening. Bring your date there and then go to dinner downtown at one of the local restaurants. Or come on Saturday morning to the farmers market. I went this past Saturday and got some soap and some desserts. So it was, and tasted a really good grass-fed beef meatball, which was really neat. So that came from Iowa, which is where I grew up. So it's a really neat, and there's a lot happening downtown. So y'all go check it out. Again, thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Devan.
We'll see you soon. Yeah, and y'all come back now. Do good.